Hey everyone, Scott here, and today we have a thrift store hymnal, not a Bible. This is the 1989 United Methodist Hymnal. It is the official hymnal of the United Methodist Church, and as someone who grew up in the United Methodist Church, this is something that was in front of me every Sunday. Before we had contemporary worship services and we had projectors providing all the lyrics on the wall. We had to look at this every Sunday. This had the songs, it had prayers, it had services. It's got, Lord's Supper, weddings, funerals, baptisms, confirmations, creeds, everything's in here. So it was a very important piece of the United Methodist church service. And as a result, it was very formative in my Christian upbringing and something that's important to me. So, despite the fact I'm no longer actively involved with the United Methodist Church, I have this and a few other Methodist hymnals. Despite growing up with this, though, I've found there's a lot I didn't know about it, and it has a very interesting story and history as to how it came about. One of the big things that you find as you look into it and compare it with other hymnals is that there was a uh, very strong effort to make this a hymnal for corporate worship for everybody, regardless of gender, race, nationality, and more. This was very purposely made to be a hymnal that would serve everybody, that sought to make everyone feel included, and it made a lot of changes compared to other hymnals to accomplish that, some of which were, uh, met with some resistance, and we'll be looking at some of that. But I think the goal was very noble, and it's interesting how they did that, and it makes it stand out from really not only really all the previous Methodist hymnals, but a lot of other hymnals as well. So it's going to be interesting to look at this. Throughout, I'm going to be comparing it with some other hymnals from the Methodist tradition. Scooch it aside here. The first one, the main one I'll be comparing it with is this. This is the 1966 Methodist hymnal, also called the Book of Hymns, and it predates the United Methodist Church. This was the last hymnal created for the Methodist Church before it merged with the Evangelical United Brethren Church in 1968. This continued to be the official hymnal of the United Methodist Church for several years, although churches from the Evangelical United Brethren tradition were able to use their hymnal that they had as well. It was also considered official. So in a sense, this really was the first really true United Methodist hymnal that was produced in 1989. But this one also was in use during part of my childhood. The other one we'll look at to a lesser degree for some of the comparisons is the 1939 Methodist hymnal, which we see here. And we can see this one in particular was from the Dwight A. Swisher Memorial Chapel. So yeah, we're going to get into this. I'm going to be pausing the video throughout so that I can turn pages and whatnot without taking up a lot of time. So you'll see things kind of change suddenly. That's why. And it's going to be a long video, so I hope you find this interesting and will stick with me. So let's get into it. First thing I wanted to point out about it, you can see it's red. You saw the other hymnals I just showed you were also red. That seems to be, in my experience, about the most common color these came in. This is a red hardcover, very typical. And it has this kind of red gilding. I have seen them in blue. That seems to also be common. supposedly, or I shouldn't say supposedly, actually, they were available in other colors as well. I've seen purple and green as options. I have not seen those in person. I think that would be cool to see some other colors. It seems red and blue were kind of very common and traditional. They're also available in bonded and genuine leather covers, so I can imagine perhaps maybe the choir director or pianist would have a very nice hymnal. They're going to probably have their own. For the most part, most people would, these were in the church. You didn't need to bring your own. I seem to recall my mother had one at home. I think the 1966. But yeah, mostly these were in the church along with the Bibles in the pews, and were there for you to use. So we'll open it up. Excuse me. We'll open it up and make our way to the preface. And it mentions here in the preface that they were seeking to include a broader base of musical styles. They added music from more traditions, including African American, Native American, and others. I read an article, and I'm going to have links to all these articles in the video description, but I read one article that said the hymnal includes approximately 40 African American hymns and approximately another 40 hymns from a combination of Hispanic, Asian, and Native American sources. That's quite a bit more diversity than the previous hymnal. And as an examples, they mention "We Shall Overcome" from the African American tradition. Spanish hymns. I'm gonna probably botch this, but "Camina Pueblo de Dios," which means "Walk on, people of God." And I can tell you, I do not remember singing any of those as a child in the United Methodist Church. However, I grew up in a pretty much 100% Caucasian church in a very small town. And unfortunately, there probably was not a great interest in the congregation there to sing some of those songs that were introduced in the '89 hymnal. We come to next page here. We have directions for singing. It's interesting to note in note 2 we see here. So it's giving us directions for singing these hymns. Note 2: sing them exactly as they are printed here, without altering or mending them at all. And if you have learned to sing them otherwise, unlearn it as soon as you can. That's pretty strong. That's a really strong instruction. Kind of surprised me when I read that, but there's an article that I read by Charlie Baber. Hope I'm pronouncing his name right. And he pointed out that these instructions were written by John Wesley in 1761, and he pointed out at the time a lot of these hymns were brand new. They were brand new, and the Methodist movement was also in its infancy. And, the situation was that the preacher had a hymnal and probably nobody else did. You just had one hymnal. The preacher would teach the songs. Everyone else would learn them one line at a time, and you had to memorize them. So it was very important to get it right. And, that makes sense, I think, in that context, why it would be so kind of serious about that. You didn't have a hymnal in front of you if you knew a different version. We also, should consider that, John and Charles Wesley wrote a lot of hymns, John to a degree as well, and altered some of the hymns of his brother. So a lot of the Methodist theology, or I should say Wesleyan Arminian theology that they ascribed to, was kind of baked into the songs that they wrote and chose for the hymnal. So the fact that the theology is very much a part of the songs would also mean it's important to know them, learn them correctly. The other note here I wanted to point out, which is kind of interesting. Note 4 I really like. Let's see if I can bring it. Set my notes down for a second. I'm going to bring this closer, but so you can actually see these. But note 4 says, "Sing lustily and with good courage. Beware of singing as if you were half dead or half asleep, but lift up your voice with strength. Be no more afraid of your voice now, nor more ashamed of it being heard, than when you sung the songs of Satan." Oh, that's so yeah, I guess that means when I get to church, I better sing with the same vigor I was while I was playing Metallica in the car on the way there, right? Yeah. But yes, good, definitely good advice there. Need to sing strongly. Here we have numbers 94 and 95. These are the songs we used for the Doxology. We sang these one or the other pretty much every Sunday after taking the offering, so I've had these memorized for years, which has worked out well. I've been in other churches since then that have sung the Doxology, sometimes just kind of off the cuff, unplanned, and it seems everybody, has it memorized and is able to do that. I'm not sure, if their traditions it was also common, but I have it memorized because like I say, I sang this every Sunday. So I just wanted to include that because that was something I remember very strongly from my childhood. We go a couple other pages. I'm just going to point out two. This is one, I don't know, maybe my absolute favorite hymn. Definitely one of my absolute favorite hymns. "To God Be the Glory." I always love hearing that. That's just a great hymn, and it's one I love to see included in the hymnal. So, just some personal notes from me. Going to talk now about some of the changes, alterations, just other things that were done in the 1989 hymnal to make it more inclusive overall for corporate worship. The first big thing, well, first we'll kind of go over each thing briefly and then we'll get into examples. So, first thing is gender inclusive language. This came out in 1989, same time as the NRSV translation of the Bible, which was commonly used in the United Methodist Church. And, that's at a time when gender inclusive language was a bit controversial. At this point, it's become a lot more common even in more supposedly or so-called conservative translations. Now it seems it's very common in a lot of translations, but at the time it was not. And this hymnal used gender inclusive language just like the NRSV did. Many traditional hymns that used masculine language to refer to people in general, which of course used to be common in English, like brothers, men, etc., they were updated to use inclusive language like brothers and sisters or friends, things like that. The of course purpose being to remove language that might make women feel excluded. Composers were asked not to use masculine references to God, although masculine references in older familiar songs were allowed to remain. Traditional male images of God, such as Father or King, were retained, but they sought to remove masculine pronouns like his or him. The next thing that was updated in many cases was archaic language, so references to humans such as thee were largely updated to more modern English usage. They sought to remove any language that may be seen as a pejorative, either towards racial minorities or the disabled, and we'll see some examples of that. And as you can imagine, this did not come without controversy. All these changes, they were accused of changing words, and of course, people who knew the hymns and their in the forms that they had become accustomed to in the 1966 hymnal. It's hard when you know something, you sing it every Sunday to get used to doing it a different way. But in terms of changing words, I found something by Bonnie Jones Geweiler, probably messing her name up, sorry. She headed up the Important Hymns subcommittee, and she stated that, in a sense, she actually believed the new hymnal was more authentic in many ways, and that in many cases they actually reverted lyrics of many songs back to the original words. John Wesley had changed some songs that his brother Charles had written, and in some cases they actually had gone back to the way Charles had originally written it. So that was interesting to hear. I don't know any examples of that in particular, but I think maybe the point there is there's a tradition ever since the first Methodist hymnal of changing things as the person composing the hymnal saw fit. So this was really nothing new. So look at some examples here. Right now I've got it open to hymn 224, Good Christian Friends Rejoice. And this is an example of inclusive language. If we look at this in the 66 hymnal, number 391, we see it was titled Good Christian Men Rejoice. So that title and the first line that corresponds with it were updated to make that more inclusive. Here's another example of inclusive language. This is in Christ the Lord is Risen Today. This is one that, I remember us singing this a lot. This is another one of my favorites. In the first verse down here it says, Earth and heaven in chorus say. That was changed from, you see here, number 439 in the 66 hymnal. Sons of men and angels say. So, sons of men, taking out that to make that more inclusive as earth and heaven. So there's an example of, that's a very subtle change. I should say, maybe not subtle, but subtle in the sense that the title didn't change. I think a lot of people, unless they know the song really well, would not have noticed that change necessarily. And this is the last example of a inclusive change I'm going to present. And this is one I'm including because my mother mentioned it when I was talking to her about my plans for this video. This is one of her favorite hymns, except that in this one it's called God of the Ages, and we see it starts God of the Ages, whose almighty hand. But what my mother grew up with, and that was number 698 in the 89 hymnal, in the 66 hymnal, she grew up with number 552, God of our fathers. And we see God of our fathers, whose almighty hand. That one, to me, it's interesting. I respect the purpose behind that change. I think you do end up losing something, though. There's, I think, a familial sense with God of our fathers. The God of my God, the God of my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, so on and so forth. God of the Ages is less, feels less directly connected. Certainly God is the God of all time and all the ages, but the familial connection just, to me, it seems stronger. So, I'm not, it's the change. I understand it in terms of what it's accomplishing. I do think you lose something there, though, with not having that familial connection. It changes the meaning quite a bit. Next thing I'm going to look at here is removing gender in reference to God. This is, of course, a very sensitive subject in Christian faith, and we'll see that it is done quite extensively in the Psalter in the 1989 UMC Hymnal. In the preface here, they mention that bring it closer so we can see it and get it to focus. There we go. It mentions here that it is based on the New Revised Standard Version of the Book of Psalms, is faithful to the biblical text and its message, so on and so forth. Metaphors and forms of address for people and deity are, with few exceptions, inclusive. And it mentions that this is recommended for use with common lectionary. And we're going to go ahead and look at Psalm 23 because we all know that one, of course. And we're going to see it's a very different rendering than we see pretty much anywhere else. And we see here, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, restores my life, leads me in right paths for the sake of the Lord's name." And what they've done here is, instead of saying like, "He makes me lie down," we have "the Lord," and then it would be, "He leads me, He restores my life, He leads me." They've just dropped "He" to avoid using the masculine language there. I think for me the biggest problem I see there is I just don't think it's very poetic at all, or really very good English. It's interesting to note that for its reputation as being a very gender-inclusive, liberal translation, the NRSV does not go that far. I have here the NRSV, and we see, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for His name's sake." So it uses, it has no problem using masculine language to refer to God. Another one I compared with as I was researching this was this is the 1979 Book of Common Prayer used in the Episcopalian Church. The Psalter in this was also the subject of some controversy in its time because they dropped the, what is it called? The Covendale Psalter, I believe, for a more modern one. But we see here, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. He revives my soul and guides me along right pathways for His name's sake." So also using masculine language in reference to God. So the UMC Hymnal in its Psalter here really went quite far in making that change. It is noteworthy that for this particular psalm, we see here at the bottom, "For the King James Version, 1611, see number 137. And indeed, the hymnal contains the King James Version that we all know so well. That's an area where, I don't remember using this Psalter in church growing up, and I wonder if it just did not go over well with people. For me, the issue is, I refer to God using masculine language myself, and I think that's biblical, but I don't have a problem with their attempt to avoid it. But it just, I don't think it renders very well. I just don't think it's a very nice rendering. I'm not going to show it, but the 66 hymnal, it uses, I think for the 23rd Psalm, it used the King James Version. Overall, it primarily uses the RSV, which was a predecessor to the NRSV for its Psalter. Now, in the hymns and other places, references to God as Father and King remain. One of the questions is, are there any references to God as female included in this hymnal? And the answer appears to be no. There was a song proposed to being, or a hymn to be included. I just messed that sentence up. It was proposed to include a hymn, there we go, titled Strong Mother God, and that was rejected by the editors. The closest reference to God as female that I came across in my research comes in hymn 118. It does not refer to God as female, but we do see here, I'll bring it up so you can see it. It mentions the care the eagle gives her young, safe in her lofty nest. So kind of a comparison of God's love to that of a mother eagle for her children. So not a female, not a reference of God as female, but a comparison to a mother eagle. Look now at some examples where changes were made to remove pejorative language. And this is the first one, Nothing But the Blood. I didn't actually find this hymn included in either of the other Methodist hymnals I have, but it's in a traditional hymn, at least an older hymn. 1876, there we go. And the original, what you would see is, in the original, it states white as snow instead of, we see here, bright as snow. And the goal there being to avoid language that makes white as pure, holy, and not white being evil or wicked. And that kind of imagery, it's very common in the humanities and the arts. However, it has been used in ways that have been racist, pejorative type of language. And they wanted to avoid that, which is understandable. The thing you lose there, though, is there is an allusion there to Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, which I should have had ready, and I don't. Alright, let's find it. I guess I could have paused. Oh well. Here we go. Now I'm going to show you it in the RSV instead of the NRSV, and I'll explain why. But we see here in the RSV, Isaiah 1:18, "Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. They shall, though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool." The NRSV drops the white as snow, and it just says, basically just says as snow. It doesn't explain what about the snow, and the comparison becomes a little stranger that way, but I'm assuming the NRSV made the change for similar reasons. So in terms of comparing this with the NRSV, it's the same, but every other translation I've looked at has white as snow, and it seems the Hebrew supports that, so you do lose that allusion there. But, again, using this in corporate worship, that is a connection that could be a source of some pain, some hurt for some, based on the experiences they've had, and not having that there, avoids, I think, opening some wounds. And here's another example where the editors struggled with how to handle pejorative language. This is "Oh, for a Thousand Tongues to Sing." This is this is one of Wesley's hymns. And we see in verse 6, "Hear him, ye deaf, his praise, ye dumb. Your loosened tongues employ, ye blind, behold, your Savior come, and help ye lame and leap ye lame for joy." I think we can all agree that is a line that we would not include a rite today to have in a hymn. The hymn was actually considered just for complete removal. They actually thought about just completely getting rid of it in the 89 hymnal, but that that was a tough choice to make, just given the prominence of this particular hymn in the Methodist tradition. So what you just saw, and I didn't explain, what you just saw was from the 1966 hymnal. In the 89, what they've done, as we'll see here, it's still there, but they've added a seventh verse. I think the original by Wesley has quite a few more verses. And what you see here is, down here is an asterisk, may be omitted, and they're referring, there we go, to verse 6. So they're leaving it open to the particular church congregation to skip that if they so desire. And then having verse 7 there, if they want to do 6 verses, they can sing that one instead. We have now an example of a theological change in hymn number 362, How Can We Sinners Know? This is the 89 hymnal, and we see in the first line, How can we sinners know our sins on earth forgiven? This is a change from the 66 hymnal, where the song is titled, How Can a Sinner Know? And we see, how can a sinner know his sins on earth forgiven? This change I read about in an article by C. Michael Hahn, and mentions that it was originally more of a personal theological treatise, but the change was made to make it act as more of a communal activity of reflection, which makes sense for it being a congregational song being used in a corporate worship setting. And this apparently was not the first time this particular song was changed. This is one of Wesley's hymns that, like many, was changed by his brother John. And I mentioned that earlier, in some sense we may say the tradition of changing hymns as seen needed in the Methodist tradition lives on. I personally, I think that change makes sense. We should be, I think we should be coming to God individually in our personal prayers and devotions, admitting our sin and seeking forgiveness. To me, it makes sense to do that in a more of a we sort of way with the corporate worship and music. It also, of course, at the same time, lets them remove the he, so that we have more inclusive language there. Looking now at a change to the wedding rite. This is number 864 in the 1989 hymnal. There is no wedding rite in the 1966 hymnal. I looked through it a couple times and I do not see one. I'm not sure why that is. It may be perhaps that they felt it didn't need to be included, since that's not a typical or really a normal Sunday morning activity. That's a separate service from Sunday morning worship. I'm not sure what the reasoning was, but there is a wedding rite in the 1989, and there is a wedding rite in the 1939, and we see some significant changes there. A big one is, if we look at the 1939, we see, and this is of course very normal for traditional wedding service, we see it starts with the man, and as we come over here, who giveth this woman to be married to this man? The father of the woman, or whoever giveth her in marriage, shall answer, I do. In the 89, it starts with the woman instead of the man over here. But more significantly, there is no giving away of the woman, either by the father or anyone else. Instead, it has a response of the families and people, which it acknowledges the joining of the families through the marriage, and offers them a chance to respond, as well as to the people as a whole who are attending the wedding. And that's something I think it just makes a lot of sense. I was a wedding photographer for about 7 years, and I have seen weddings where the bride was given by her father or some other significant relation of hers, but I'd say it's not the majority. The majority is no one's really giving the bride away, and that makes sense, as many women, of course, are independent, well established before they're getting married. My wife was not given away at our wedding. She was giving herself. So, that updates things in that sense. It does mention in the notes, though, that it is acceptable to use the wedding services from the former Evangelical United Brethren Church or the former Methodist Church. So if someone so wanted to choose to use the older services, they could. We're looking now at a hymn titled Onward Christian Soldiers that probably many of us are familiar with. And this and some others drew controversy at a very national level in 1986, when it was first proposed that hymnals with military references would be removed. Sorry, tripping over my words again. That included this one here, Onward Christian Soldiers, as well as the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Apparently that one they were just proposing removing select verses. But anyways, it made the news, and the committee received over 11,000 pieces of mail concerning those changes, and only 44 were in support of this change. So they decided not to remove or change these hymns. They were retained in the 1989 hymnal. I personally don't remember ever singing them in church myself. I am familiar with Onward Christian Soldiers, but more so from my father's record collection. He has that on a record, and I don't remember who, but it was old, like country western artist. Okay, we are getting towards the end. I know this one's been long, but there's a lot in here. We're looking now at affirmations of faith, and we have the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, which I think are probably pretty well known to most, if not all, Christians. And there's an interesting bit of history with the Apostles' Creed and the Methodist Church. We see here, this is the 89 hymnal, that we got a couple versions of the Apostles' Creed. We have this traditional version, and we have this ecumenical version. And what we see in the traditional version, we see, born of Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. And then it doesn't have this sentence here, he descended into hell. The ecumenical version, we see it does have it, he descended to the dead. This is what was included in the Methodist hymnal for, well, pretty much since it was created. We can see the 1966, number 738, the Apostles' Creed, same thing. It does not have that, although it does have a footnote similar to the traditional version in the 89, and it has the footnote, he descended into hell. I'm not going to take the time to show you the 39, but it has the same thing without the footnote, and That's how it was even prior to that. I didn't find a good answer as to why that was. Whether that was a mistake, a theological concern, or what was the reasoning. One article I read said that Wesley sent mixed signals in that sometimes it was included and sometimes it wasn't in the things that he wrote and sent. And I just did not find a solid answer as to why that was. But it seems that having it included in this ecumenical version in the 1989 hymnal was a move by the UMC to align itself more with other churches and in how it recites the Apostles' Creed. And I don't remember from my childhood which version we used in church, if we favored one or the other. Perhaps my mother might remember. She'll probably watch this and comment. So, yeah, or if anyone else knows, please share. I'd like to hear about it. And we'll just go ahead and jump ahead a few pages here. We're going to come to 894 and forward. And here we have the Lord's Prayer. And again, this is interesting. We have several versions which reflects the history of the United Methodist Church, being a church that was seeking at the time to be more ecumenical and sharing some tradition with other churches, and also recognizing its the traditional usages in the churches that merged to form it. So we have the ecumenical version of the Lord's Prayer. We have the former Methodist Church ritual and the former Evangelical United Brethren ritual. I do not remember ever using the ecumenical text, and the churches that I was in, I recall we always used the Methodist Church version, number 895, and that uses trespasses instead of debts, and that this is the Lord's Prayer that I've always known and recited off the top of my head. Okay, so there we have it, 1989 United Methodist Hymnal. There's a lot that I didn't look at, didn't cover, or that I would have liked to have covered in more detail, and I may do some follow-up videos in the future. There's a topic in there in particular that my wife and I may do a video together on, but this is going to be enough for this one. As we saw, there was a very concerted effort to make this a hymnal for everybody, and I think they achieved that. As I mentioned, I do think there are times where changes to language to make that happen did cause some loss of some other meaning or references to text in the Bible, things like that. That is unfortunate. But, the thing is, this is a hymnal for corporate worship, for use in the congregation. And when you're trying to make something that's going to kind of work for everybody, you're going to risk that for some people there's going to be things they don't like. And certainly that happened a lot when this came out in 1989. But the good news is we don't have to use what's in here for our personal devotions. If there's something we like better, we like something phrased a different way, or to use a different translation for the Psalter, we can. I mean, I can tell you, I personally, I don't have any problems with this and the way they did things. I understand the reasoning. For my personal use at home, if I'm going to do the Psalter or look at how a song was written or something, I'm probably myself going to lean towards the 1966. I just like how certain things were done in there better than in the 89, and I'm familiar with some of the more traditional renderings of hymns. But I certainly utilize this too. I'm glad I have both of these because they are both an important part of my Christian upbringing in the United Methodist Church, and I appreciate having both of them in my personal library now. The last thing I want to say is, as I mentioned before, this was the first truly United Methodist hymnal. It was the first hymnal created in the church as it is now after the two churches merged. And it seems that it may truly be the last United Methodist hymnal as well. There's been talk of the new hymnal being more of a digital format, allowing congregations to kind of, there'd be some core hymns and services, and then other things that could be added or subtracted depending on the needs of a particular congregation. So that, it sounds like there's going to be a less of a common hymnal for the whole church and more of a kind of build your own and customize it as needed. The other thing, of course, is that a lot of churches are doing more contemporary worship services. It has been quite a few years since I have attended a United Methodist church where these were even in the pews. We just haven't used them anymore. I think the last time I attended a UMC service was about a year ago, and it was a contemporary service. And, I think those services are great. I have no problem with contemporary services. I do wonder if the church starts to lose something, though, the less that it depends on this. Because the hymnal and the hymns were selected and, in many cases written, especially by Charles Wesley, to support and promote the theology of the church. And in the case of the UMC, that is, of course, Wesleyan Arminian type of theology. And, I think for myself, even though I'm not active in the UMC anymore, I don't really consider myself a United Methodist anymore, I do have very much a theological understanding that is rooted in that tradition and that upbringing. And that's something I hadn't really given a lot of thought of until maybe a couple of years ago as an adult. But I realized it's there. And, some may say, well, yeah, okay, of course you're a Wesleyan Arminian. You grew up in the United Methodist Church. And, okay, yeah, that's true. And, depending on what they think about that, they might say some other things too. But, we didn't talk about it. I didn't think about it. Like, my wife was raised in a very Calvinist tradition, and she knows, Calvinism. She knows tulip. She knows all those things. We didn't really, we didn't sit down and learn about the Articles of Remonstrance in my UMC upbringing. I think where the understanding and the learning comes from is in having that sort of theology. Well, one, of course, the sermons and the teaching in the church, but I think another big thing is the hymns. We see a lot of the hymns in the UMC hymnal having that sort of a flavor. I do wonder, as churches use more of the contemporary music, are they ensuring that music, and I don't just mean the UMC, I mean every church, are they ensuring that the music they're selecting fits the theology and teachings of the church, and is good theology? Because unfortunately, there are some contemporary Christian songs out there that are not spouting very good theology. So that's something to think about as the church moves away from this. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. I have said a lot already. This video is going to clock in right around 50 minutes. And if you have watched it all, thank you for watching. Please click like, leave a comment. If you have any thoughts on anything I've said, agree, disagree, I'd love to hear about it. Like I said, I hope to do some follow-up videos in the future, so if you want to catch those or any of my thrift store Bible reviews or whatever else I'm going to do, please subscribe, and we'll see you for the next one. Thank you.